Breen. I'm totally talking right now underneath this helmet. It's so crisp and clear. I'm definitely not recording this after the fact. Look at me dance. Oh, look at me go. Breen. Hello there, interwebs, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery's final season. This one, episode, what are we on, 7 now? I think it's 7. I believe it's 7. I've lost track of numbers and time and all that. The helmet was a little bit too tight. But regardless, let's talk about this one. As per usual, let me just put this down over here. Also, you see those books back here? That's my giant pile of books that I'm using to research my Deep Space Nine video. That's a topic for another day. Anywho, let's talk about this. As per usual, I'm going to stay spoiler-free up front, and then we will get into spoilers in just a little bit with a warning. So staying spoiler-free, I have to say this was a particularly important episode for Star Trek Discovery in its overall story this season, because if we look at past seasons of Star Trek Discovery, around this point in the season, like a little bit past the midway point, we start to reach this moment where the ongoing season-long serialized story becomes the more pressing part of the story and sort of takes away from the more individual episodic elements that the season usually has been doing. And for some seasons, that shift into the more front of center storyline can be of benefit, like I think season 4 for the most part had. And in other ways, it can kind of be a detriment, as we started getting in, I think season 2 was sort of the biggest one with that, with the Red Angel storyline like falling completely off the rails, I think, towards the latter half of the season. And and even then, even when it's done fairly well, like I think season 4 handled it all right, the pacing still kind of feels off, and I never really feel like Discovery ever nailed it. I think the closest it came was season 1, where it did take that detour into the Mirror Universe, which I actually thought was solid on its own, if a bit rushed and a distraction within the Klingon War, but at least felt like a contained thing that was trying to get to certain points. Whereas other seasons feel like they're kind of just jumping all over the place and the pacing feels off. Regardless, what that means for this episode is now we are starting to see the more end game of the season come to the fore, specifically around, and this is the spoiler if you have not seen previous episodes of this season, though not really a spoiler for this episode if you haven't seen it yet, the Breen kind of become much more front and center of the storyline here. And so to kind of see them come front and center and be the kind of big bad instigating force, it does leave me going, well, are they going to feel like a threat? Are they going to feel like tacked on? Are they going to feel like they're distracting from the main storyline surrounding the scavenger hunt and the progenitor tech that we've been aiming for this entire season? And what I have to say is that I think this episode does a good job setting up the Breen as a credible threat and makes me intrigued and interested to see where they go. But this episode, while not bad, I don't think it's an awful episode by any means, doesn't really hit the highs for me that I really wanted it to, especially given the fact that this episode centers around one of my favorite types of stories within the Star Trek world, and that is the political machinations and trying to politic your way out of certain situations. They're my favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine. Even Next Generation had a few of those as well. Voyager and Enterprise actually had a lot of them towards the end of its run, and those are some of my favorites as well. And then even Star Trek Discovery's last season, one of my favorite episodes last season was But to Connect, which also was a big heavy emphasis on politics. Those are always my favorite episodes of any Star Trek show. It's why I want to be a showrunner of a Star Trek sort of West Wing style show, though hopefully with a little less of the liberal, capital L liberalism, and a little bit of my more leftist politics, but that's a discussion for a different day, though Alex Kurtzman, I am a writer, if you ever want to hear a pitch, that's regardless, I'll stop shilling my wares. Anywho, but that's the kind of storylines that I've always wanted for a Star Trek show, and what I really love from a Star Trek episode, and this episode kind of tries to get to that, and there are some moments that I really, really love within that, and some interesting plays here, but overall, I didn't feel like it hit the highs that I really wanted it to with the setup that it has, and also tends to I don't even want to say flatten the Breen, because the Breen are still interesting at this point, and they still set them up to be interesting going forward, but I don't think there is as much nuance presented with them as I really hope to be getting in an episode that is solely focused on them. It doesn't distract from them or detract from them, but it does not evolve them as much as I would like. So hopefully we can get a little bit more of the Breen evolution in terms of like getting more to know more about their society in the next few episodes, and it certainly has set it up to be that way by the episode end. The thing I do like about this episode, though, is there are some really nuanced character moments. Raynor continues to be a very interesting and intriguing character that I really, really love and I'm excited to see more of. In fact, I forgot, I didn't frame my camera correctly, but I'll even tilt it a little bit here. But he's giving me shades of this guy, Jakar, and actually my gal Kira from Deep Space Nine with some of the developments that he gets in this episode. So I am interested to see how they evolve that, but what's presented here with him, I really adored. Also, Book gets some strong stuff as well. And then Maul and Locke also get a few interesting things here too that still kind of fall into the, I don't even want to say rote territory, but not the unexpected territory, and they are falling into, again, that Bonnie and Clyde feel for me, where, damn, I always forget to turn off my phone when I do these reviews. Dang it. I'm a professional. But they're falling into this Bonnie and Clyde thing where, you know, they care about each other deeply and they would sacrifice anything for each other, and that's kind of the storyline that we're getting. And while it is effectively done and the actors are doing a great job, and I like them a lot, there's not anything super, super special that makes this unique and ultimately super different than that dynamic. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's not terrible. It's effectively done and does what it needs for the story, but it's not making me be like, yeah, Maul and Locke, they're the super intriguing things that I really am excited to see more of on screen. I don't hate them when they show up. I love the performances, but they're also not exciting me either. And there's nothing in particular that's drawing me into like, yeah, I want to see much more of them. But again, I'm not detracted either. And that's kind of where I'm at there at the end of this episode. We'll get into spoilers in just a minute, but it just feels like this was a good setup for the latter half of the season, sets the threat well, makes me excited to see where they're going, and certainly hasn't created a like weird, shaky foundation that previous seasons of Discovery have had at this point in their arcs. But it doesn't really excite me going forward much either. So I am really curious to see what is going forward here. But ultimately, I'm left a little bit disappointed just because this type of episode is one that I always enjoy and have really liked from Discovery's past. I would even call out Season 3's penultimate episode where we had Vance sort of dealing with the Emerald Chain is another one that I really liked in that vein as well. But this one doesn't, I think, hit those highs of previous Discoveries or other Star Treks when it comes to this type of episode. So a good episode, but one that I'm a little bit personally disappointed in, and dang it, phone, I thought I turned you off. Excited to see going forward. I'm going to turn it off now, and we'll get into spoilers. All right, now just to be very clear, here's my little lower decks screensaver here. My phone is on Do Not Disturb, so you're not going to get any more little annoying chirps there. Also, I should make this a TNG chirp when it notifies me. Why haven't I done that? That feels like a thing I should do. Anyways, moving on, let's talk spoilers about this episode. We start off the episode with just something that was like a nitpick for me. We hear like the Maul and Locke signal that they're putting out, and it sort of like echoes through space, and I thought it was a really cool sound effect. Sound design was wonderful. Makes no sense in space. And I get it, it's a transmission, like it doesn't break the logic of the show necessarily in terms of like their transmission, they're hearing it on their, like, you know, from the hails or whatever. But within the sound design of the show, it's like you wouldn't hear like the transmission in space, and it wouldn't like get echoier distance-wise in space from the ship because there's no sound in space. So sound design stuff was cool, visually was cool, and again, it's a caveat, but my nerd brain was just like, that makes no sense. But I'm like one of like 10 people who care. We also get Nan back. Always great to see Nan. Love her. She brings the yum yum to Star Trek Discovery. As they say, I do really like her, despite some people's feelings about her, but I think she's great. And I love her relationship with Burnham in this episode that feels very, very friendly and respectful of Burnham as captain, but not like overly reliant on that hierarchy, to the point where when Nan pushes against Book, it's like, no, you can't really see Maul, but I will consider it and sort of give you some deference a little bit when we get to that point. And her saying like, I went easy on him because I know what he means to you, Burnham, and that smile between the two of them, I thought was really wonderful. So it's like Nan's good at her job. She knows how to keep the professionalism. She knows to like draw lines even when she knows like there's a person in a hierarchy above her that may have issues with how she handles things, but she's always able to keep it friendly and kind and respectful. So Nan, amazing, adore this character. Always glad to see her back, even in small bit parts here and there. But then we have Maul and Locke coming onto Discovery, and we have Culber trying to heal Locke, and we get to learn a little bit more about how much the Breen physiology? Breen medical stuff that Starfleet knows, which still isn't all that much despite these centuries that have gone by, because the Breen have remained secretive. So they don't really know how to treat Locke, but they'll do their damned best. So that's sort of our setup there, even though Locke is sort of in a very close to terminal case that needs to be healed, and they're in Federation custody, which leads to the next bit where we have Vance coming in and saying the Breen are on their way to Federation HQ. They want Locke, and it's going to set off a sort of not only just a diplomatic crisis, but could spark a war. Now, Burnham argues that they shouldn't run away. They should stand their ground and just sort of deal with the Breen here and now. And I can see an argument both for and against this, and I ultimately don't really agree with Burnham, because the reason you would run, right, would be to give the Federation plausible deniability of having them, but also to buy yourself time. Now, the plausible deniability thing can come back and bite you in the ass later on if the Breen figure out, like, oh, you did have them and you were just hiding from them from us. That could escalate tensions further. So that is a fair point in Burnham's box. But the other thing is they are in a time crunch for the progenitor tech, and every single second buys you more time to get ahead in that race, which is important. So yes, that I feel like even just a little bit more time in this would have been a better move, but I can see the argument the other way. And also giving Maul and Locke to the Breen isn't really something they'd want to do, because they have information about the progenitor tech, which will become a problem later on down the line in the episode. So I can see the argument either way. I ultimately feel like I would disagree with Burnham just giving the pressing nature of the progenitor tech, but I can see the argument that she's making here. So some interesting sort of diplomacy and stuff going on here that I found to be intriguing, even if I ultimately disagreed with our heroes. We do get President Tarina, which, by the way, I keep saying her name wrong, so hopefully I say it correctly. I have weird, for some reason, names, like specific names, just don't land in my head correctly. People have always been calling that out in my videos. I don't know why my brain doesn't hold names correctly. Apologies to Tarina. Anyways, she's running the show here because President Rylak is off on another planet doing her own thing, aka the actress didn't come in, which makes me sad because I like Rylak. But regardless, Tarina's running the show, and she's basically trying to figure out, you know, basically what they can do for the Primarchs. And we also get Raynor sort of having this prejudice against the Breen. He is very much more like, punch them on the nose, you gotta push back, they don't understand anything different. And it very much reminded me of, and I think this is definitely a direct parallel that I think the episode even makes at the end, with Burnham in season 1 and all the way back in the pilot, where she was also like, we gotta punch the Klingons on the nose, we gotta give them a Vulcan hello, it's the only way they will respond. So again, we're getting some parallels to Burnham and Raynor here in their development over the course of the show, which I, again, like those callbacks in a subtle way. Also, what we ultimately learn with Raynor, and I'll talk about this here just because we're on the topic, is that he lived as a people that were oppressed and had their resources stolen from them, indigenous people that had their resources stolen from them by not necessarily this Breen Primarch, but a different Primarch who was also vying for the control of the Breen Imperium, and that they were just collateral damage in someone else's war, as he said, which again very much reminded me of both G'Kar and Kira, both characters who also had similar backgrounds. And while I would say Raynor probably falls closer to Major Kira than G'Kar, who is ended up being a much more philosophical character by the end of Babylon 5, it is interesting too that it just informs a lot of his character's viewpoint of like this us versus them mindset. You know, you gotta fight back, the more regimented, like we gotta keep things structured sort of outlook to him, that again kind of matched a little bit of Kira's outlook as well from Deep Space Nine, and a little bit of G'Kar's too in earlier seasons of the show. So I found that to be an interesting parallel. Obviously Raynor doesn't have as much nuance as those characters because they have much more seasons than Raynor has had, but it does inform and give depth to a lot of his characters' interactions at this point. So I did really like that. There's nothing as powerful as, say, Shaw's, just because we've been making parallels to Shaw too, his speech about Wolf 359 in Star Trek Picard Season 3, which I thought was probably his defining moment as a character. So we don't get that kind of moment here with Rayner, but it does add a lot of depth to him that I really did enjoy, and I think informed his xenophobia and maybe even racism, you could even call it, towards the Breen, that is understandable, certainly, where he gets that racism, but it is racism nonetheless. So yeah, that just an interesting sort of concept to explore with his character. Then we get to, and I'll kind of sort of go through this whole storyline here, where we have Tilly running away to Federation HQ to deal with her cadets and try to protect them, and Stamets calling her back and saying, hey, we got to deal with this like weird clue that we found that's like this card that has some Beta Z writing on it that says the Labyrinth of the Mind. Now, just a quick note here, I didn't understand why Tilly was running away to Federation HQ to protect her cadets. What is she really going to do? I get it, she has a protection of her cadets, but it really just felt like this scene was kind of here just to add some like a weird urgency to the situation with Tilly. It's not all that bad, but it was just one of those like just it feels like a weird conversation for Tilly to be having, especially considering we really just have not seen her be with her cadets at all. Like, the cadets were characters like that we had seen. I guess we kind of saw them a little bit in season 4. If she has the same cadets from season 4, maybe. But still, just the fact that they're just a nebulous thing just felt like a weird way to introduce some tension into the scene. Regardless, though, this does lead to Stamets and Tilly and Adira and also Book coming into the conversation to try to figure out what this clue is. I did really like Tilly and Adira going to Jet Reno to figure out, like, okay, you dealt with like rare books, like what? And just Jet Reno's just like, I'm gonna figure things out. Yeah, we'll talk about some stuff. Like, what's up with the Breen? They're like jackboots. It's really it's the helmets and everything. It's just like, it's very unsubtle. But which I was like, kind of agree with you. I would like to learn more about the Breen beyond like the helmet stuff, which was some interesting nuanced discovery added a few episodes ago, but hasn't pushed further since. So it's a little bit lampshading with that. But just Jet Reno is phenomenal, and I love that back and forth. And I love this idea of there being like an archive that people would go to, and like they would try and protect different books and knowledge and just like save it from different civilizations. I think that's really, really cool and interesting concept. So excited to see where that's going to go in future episodes. So yeah, that all is really cool. The other element I liked is Book feeling like, oh, I got to go deal with this mall situation, but Stamets calling him back, which I thought was very smart because it brings parallels to stuff that he was dealing with in season 4, where he was like, I need to run out there, I need to be in front of things, I need to feel like I'm doing something to help my planet that was destroyed last season that ultimately led him down a bad path, and just sort of this impulsive emotional gut reaction, and Stamets pulling him back to that and saying, no, we need to focus on what's important right now. So I did like that, and I love the idea of him using his telepathic abilities to be able to read this Beta Z I guess library card is what we ultimately learn it is, and where it is in the Briar Patch. Now, the thing that I call into question about this to a degree, though we could retcon it a little bit, is we do learn that the archive apparently moves from place to place over time. So why would this card be specifically tied to that place that Book saw if this was made 800 years ago? Like, why would he get a signal of that location when we also know the archive moves? It just doesn't match up to me. That being said, maybe we could even retcon it, or maybe we'll get a further explanation of something like the card is like telepathically presently tied to the archive in some way, so it will just always be remembering where the archive is, wherever it is. So if it moved, the telepathic link would also change along with it. So that's possible as an explanation, but as it stands, there's a little bit of connecting the dots that the episode didn't do that left me a little bit like, I don't know if these things necessarily line up as thoughts. But again, we also get this idea of eternal, so maybe it has something to do with a completely different clue. We'll see. Ultimately, we go back to the Maul and Locke situation, and I have to say, I love when Culbert decides to make the room colder in order to help Locke heal, which I thought was an interesting idea, that the Breen heal better in colder environments. That he was wearing this, like, jacket, and I was like, I am all here for that jacket. I want to cosplay in that jacket. It was a cool-looking, like, coat jacket that Culbert had. Loved that, was very much here for it. But yeah, we get a couple more conversations between Maul and Locke where they sort of like again express their love for each other, and they come up with this plan to escape, ultimately leading to Locke like injecting himself and putting himself in danger, and Maul is able to escape, and Nan gets her ass handed to her. I'm like, come on, Nan, you're supposed to be competent at your job, dang it. So she's able to escape. But before then, tying back into the politics of this, I loved the scene where Burnham is sort of intuiting from the information she has who Locke is, because it's like, why is this Primarch after you? What does he need? And she just like ultimately just threw some like, here's a piece of information I have, here's a piece of information I have, how can I get to this information? Like just connecting the dots I thought was very smart and logically made sense, getting Locke to admit that he is actually the descendant of the former, what is it, emperor or whatever, the former leader of the Breen Imperium that this Primarch wants to take advantage of to legitimize his claim. So thought that was really interesting, and Locke just wanting to reject it and be done with it completely. So I thought all of that was really cool and a good like intuiting situation with Burnham. But then this leads to the political situation with the Breen, and again, here's what I kind of will say. There's elements of this these sequences that I really like, such as the translation moment. I've watched a lot of Shogun recently. If you have not seen Shogun, go watch it. It is phenomenal. And that show does such a good job of using translation and language to create really effective drama throughout in numerous different ways. And so this moment too, where Tarina, she is like listening to what the Primarch is saying and is actually like, I actually can understand what he's saying. It's a little bit more offensive than you're translating it for me in a little diplomatic way, which I thought was kind of fun and just an interesting idea. The episode sadly doesn't capitalize on that concept. I really would have loved to see more of that play out. Again, this is some of the like politics stuff that was left on the table that I would have liked to see more of in this episode. But at least there's some elements of it that I found to be interesting. What I do ultimately like though is the bluff that they play with this Primarch, because they say, well, we've contacted this other Primarch, the one that Raynor knows and oppressed his people, and you kind of have I forget his name, the Primarch that we're dealing with, sort of like being like, I don't really buy this, but I liked it because they are ultimately through Raynor able to prove that they know her, they have information on her, so they can at least say like, oh yeah, we're not just pulling it out completely out of our asses. So they have some legitimacy to what they're saying. And for the Primarch that we're currently dealing with, I could understand him still not believing it's a bluff, or still thinking it's a bluff, I should say, but not wanting to call it, because the only way to really call it would be he could maybe lose everything with it, and then also if he does call it, or maybe like contacts the other Primarch to confirm it, then she will know where Locke is, and he doesn't want to give her that information. So I thought this towing the line worked well, and them sort of saying, look, we can do this as a way that benefits you, we keep the status quo, we hold on to Locke, no one gets him, you deal with it the way you were planning on dealing with it anyways. So I thought that was ultimately a really smart play that I did enjoy. But ultimately it kind of becomes a moot point, because when Locke helps Maul escape, he does put himself back into medical crisis and does die. Which, good on Burnham for trying to get the Breen there to help prevent that death. And I also really like the scene where Book is able to get Maul to trust him to come back, so we can see a little bit more building relationship between Book and Maul, which I did like, also as a moment and a beat. But it ultimately leads to Locke dying and Maul deciding to give the information to the Breen. And again, makes sense for Maul. It's the only real play that she has, because she wants to save Locke. She wants to save his life. She knows the progenitor check can do that, but she knows if she stays within the Federation really has no incentive to help her out or to use the technology to bring Locke back, because she doesn't have any information that the Federation doesn't already have about the information of the progenitor tech, and why would they help her? Why would they use it on Locke when it's not really tested? Whereas the Breen have every incentive to bring Locke back, and also she can kind of have a power position because she has information with them, and also has a connection to Locke and through their like marriage thing that they have, which I thought was interesting with the tattoos. Again, adding a little bit more to Breen culture. So it made sense for her to make that play. I'm curious to see how that's going to shake out, and I did also think it made sense that the Federation was going to give her up, because they didn't really have many other cards to play at that point, so I was like, I kind of have to give it to her. But again, setting up Book into an interesting position, because again, he has to kind of take it on the chin of something that he wants for the Federation to side against him, and put someone that he views as even a distant member of his family in danger. Again, sort of echoing stuff that happened with Season 4. So I'm curious that they're setting Book up to kind of be in the same emotional position, as season 4, and I'm wondering if they're going to have him choose to do differently or choose to do the same, and what that's going to mean for Book and Burnham's relationship in the long run. I have a feeling, considering this is the final season, maybe they would have chosen something differently if the season had been able to continue, or maybe they re-edited this. But I have a feeling Book will ultimately choose to side with the Federation and to sort of like swallow those emotions, but still trying to help Maul as best he can. But maybe not. Maybe he will take a different direction. We shall see. So that kind of leads us out. I don't believe there's anything else here. But yeah, like I said at the end of this, I thought this was all pretty decent, and actually talking it out, I'm like, this is actually better than I anticipated. Like, it all kind of logically makes sense. There's some good stuff here, some interesting things, but it's just one of those, like, oh man, there's some more interesting elements you could have done here, especially with the building out a little bit more Breen culture. We do get, like, the warring factions, that sort of thing, which is interesting, I guess, to a degree, but we don't really get much of, like, a reason why. Like, what's their ideology? Is it just about power? What are their belief systems? What are their culture like? So all of that's like, there's some opportunities on the table to add some more nuance into the Breen that I don't think the episode really does all that well, but ultimately it does effectively work to set up a good conflict going forward. But that being said, there's some great stuff for Book here, some interesting stuff for Maul and Locke on a decent level, Locke dying and setting him up as needing to be saved by the progenitor tech, decent, motivation for Maul and the Breen going forward. And then also we get some interesting stuff with Raynor. Who is continuing to be an interesting character and adding to his backstory and adding some interesting nuance to his character that I really loved. So yeah, I think this episode was solid. Didn't knock it out of the park, but didn't also whiff it like some episodes of Star Trek Discovery around this time in their seasons have done in the past. So excited to see what's going forward. Good setup for the rest of the season. The stakes are set with the Breen. There's a good race with them. The Federation's in danger because always has to be in a Star Trek Discovery season. But yeah, I'm curious to see where they're going to go with this. But I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. What do you think of this episode of Star Trek Discovery? I'd love to know. Beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.